Hi, Margot, and hi, Lou. How are you doing?
Yes, Dr. Makabe, how are you?
Doing very well. It's nice to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. Also nice to hear from you.
How's
It
your
has
week
been a while.
going?
Yeah, good, good, yeah.
Thanks again
We're
for
doing good, good.
being understanding about my response to your reflection journal.
Yeah, I understand you. That is acceptable.
I was
It
just
has also,
I couldn't believe I did that. I've been trying so hard not to do that. So, but I got mixed up on yours. So thanks for being
mm,
gracious about it.
no problem. The linked information will also help me what to think about
Yeah,
when I'm thinking of taking the course.
yeah.
I
Maybe
already start. I already start thinking about the six transformational leaders.
you'll be ready for that course when you get there for sure.
Yeah.
uh yeah, it's been interesting, but yeah, really great uh to be teaching both, but like I said, sorry for that mix up.
Hmm.
Hi, Summer, how are you?
Good morning. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Nice to see you.
Nice to be seen. Nice to see you all as well.
Yeah, bright and early out
Yes.
there.
How are you,
Yeah.
Summer?
And Margot, how are you? Margot, is your I think your microphone might not be on if you're trying to talk. Or maybe she's away for the moment here. So why don't I go ahead? I started recording, so I'll go ahead and pray for us to get started, and then we'll jump in because I want to make sure I respect everybody's time. So let's pray together. God, we lift up this time together. Help us to learn and to grow and to focus on you and your mission. And as we specifically take a look at things like development and advocacy today, that you would help to open our eyes to the places where we might be able to continue to advocate and to step in and be courageous through the power of your spirit to bring about transformation in the lives of the people that we are serving. So, God, we just lift up the rest of this time to you, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 So, how is everybody? Before we jump in, everybody doing okay with keeping up with the content in the course, and any struggles so far?
I did have a question. I thought I posted it. Or I thought I sent it, but about the group project work and like how that works and like, because I know initially one person that was assigned to my group, I don't believe he's taking the class any longer. So I was just kind of curious as to how that piece would work.
Yeah. So first of all, sorry if I missed your question. I'll go back through my emails or the post to make sure that I can get back to you in writing for sure. But the main thing about the group project is right now I just created those rooms. I haven't been giving you really specific assignments. Just created those spaces for you to be able to interact. I'll go back and check. I'll go back and check on the group assignments to make sure that you have the right people in your group and adjust course if needed. So I set those up in the first week and haven't looked too much at them since then. So you're gonna get your formal group project on week 6 is going to be your formal group project. So you can use those groups that I created for you to interact if you want, just to kind of bounce ideas off of people and to talk about some of the things that we're processing, but no specific assignments until week 6.
Okay, thank you.
And then even when we get to the group project, it's going to be like most BGU classes. It'll be designed to help you kind of drive towards your individual project that you're going to do at the end.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Marcel. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Brian.
Good to hear from you. We haven't really started. I just kind of opened up if anyone had any questions. So Summer had a question about the groups, and I was just saying that in group 6, you'll get your group project assignment. And for now, I just set those rooms up for you to be able to interact with each other if you'd like to help each other out with different things that we're working through each week. So any other questions about About things? Oh, nice to see you. Okay.
I didn't realize I had my video off.
Oh, okay. It's all good. I was just checking here to make sure. I don't know why Natong's not with us, but hopefully he'll be able to join us soon, unless you're already on. But it looks like, so we have Margot, Summer, Marcel, Hailu, Sarah may join us, and Natong. So I want to just encourage all of you that the online posts are looking really really good. I just finished up getting the feedback on your book reviews, so I'll be emailing those to you shortly, and probably this afternoon I'll be sending them your way. This afternoon my time. So again, check those out, and then Marcel, I think hopefully you saw my post in the bulletin board area there, but so you don't need to write on When Helping Hurts for your second book report. You can. I had emailed you about the 4 books that you could do for your review, especially since you had already ordered The Working Poor and read it, so you can go ahead and do a book report on that one as well.
Okay. Thank you. I saw the mail. I saw
Okay.
the response, and
Perfect.
I'm able to move forward. Thank you, Doctor.
All right. And Natong, welcome. Nice to see you. Okay. So why don't we jump into the content for today? I talked about the book reports a little bit, the reflection journals. Those are all due at the end, so just a reminder on those. You don't want to wait all the way until week 9 and then sit down and try to type out your full reflection journal. Try to keep up with that every week, but you don't want to send those to me. If you want to send me your reflection journals for feedback, I'm happy to give you some. And Hailu already did that last week, but it's really just to help you out if you'd like some feedback on that. But otherwise, try to keep up with those kind of on your own. And we talked about the groups. The group project will get assigned in week 6, and you can use the group space that's in there, those rooms that are created, to interact with each other if you have any questions or if you want to support each other through anything between now and week number 6. I wanted to do a deep dive here today on this concept of advocacy. So I'm going to actually share my screen with you. Just a moment here. Okay. And let me make it big. All right. So this concept of advocacy, when we read through the book When Helping Hurts, and again, many of you are familiar with that content, and you're already probably applying a lot of these things in your context. The authors talk about different things like, sometimes relief is necessary. So if there is a hurricane or an earthquake, you're not going to show up and say to everybody who's hungry and thirsty, sorry, I can't help you, because that would really be harming you. If you're going to help people get shelter, and you're going to help people to try to get back on their feet. The problem is when we get stuck in that area of relief, because it seems like that's the easiest thing to do. And as they pointed out in When Helping Hurts, that actually kind of feeds into our need to be needed. So as leaders, it's convenient when we show up and we say, here, everybody, I have the answers, I have the resources, you take them, and good luck with your life, and then you can kind of walk away from it. So that doesn't value the relationship. It kind of reinforces paternalism and some negative approaches to mission and to development. So we're trying to move into, the authors of When Helping Hurt call it, relief goes into rehabilitation, which works into development. I like to use the word advocacy as kind of like the final step that we're trying to get to. And the reason I like to use that word, I guess, is development has such a broad meaning, and so many different people use it in different contexts. Development can sometimes get confused with rehabilitation or relief. So advocacy is the highest systemic level that we can get to, speaking out with our words and also with our actions in powerful places if needed, maybe using our prophetic voice, but it's really trying to figure out why we can stop. If you're seeing all these, people floating downstream and they keep going over the waterfall and dying, you have to eventually ask yourself, what's going on upstream that is causing people to be put into the river in the first place and get sent down the river? What's causing that? And that's really what advocacy does. It tries to go as far upstream as you can get to try to make a difference. Another example, you may have heard this in some of your other BGU courses. Brad Smith, I heard him lecture on this a lot, but it's the concept of the pond. And a lot of people say, if you give someone a fish, that's relief. And if you teach a person to fish, that's kind of development or rehabilitation. But what happens if there's barbed wire around the pond and people can't access the food? It can't access the fish. Or what happens if there's a drought and the pond dries up? So this is what advocacy is. It's trying to think through the broader issues that are causing poverty in the first place or causing brokenness in the first place. So for us as transformational leaders, the temptation is to go into a situation and to be transactional. But what we really want to try to do is have this imaginary tool belt that we've been talking about a little bit in the course. And in this imaginary tool belt, you might pull out relief, you might pull out rehabilitation, or you might do some advocacy. So we'll be talking through a lot of that today. I think if you watched in the online discussion this week, I think most of you had the opportunity to see Ruth Padilla-DeBorst's lecture, her video lecture. She's a great example of someone who comes from a context where there's a lot of poverty around her in Latin America, but she's also doing a lot of great advocacy work to try to take on systemic injustices that are causing a lot of the challenges in her context. So all of us can do that. All of us empowered by the Holy Spirit can step out and do big things to participate in advocacy. A couple examples from our readings are one of the books that we read was Half the Sky. And in Half the Sky on page 252, and I know some of you have the online Kindle, so I'll try to give the chapters as well if you have an ebook. But this would be in the very last chapter of Half the Sky. It's this really powerful book where they're exposing a lot of these challenges. The last chapter is called What You Can Do, and they kind of turn the corner to some things that you can do. And in there they talk about William Wilberforce, who was very instrumental in the British Empire of ending slavery, of the abolition movement. And he was a politician, if you're familiar with his story, who was considering going into vocational pastoral ministry, and he was encouraged not to remain in politics to take on this abolition of slavery, and it became the calling of his life. But he was working at the systemic level, at the advocacy level. In the U.S., Dr. Martin Luther King would be a great example of someone who was doing advocacy in the United States, and they have him listed as well in this final chapter. But on pages 252 and 253 in Half the Sky, they listed 4 specific ways that you could get involved in action. So one of them was to give to a micro enterprise, like Kiva is one of the examples that they gave, where you can work to empower and provide some funding for somebody who could maybe help in the majority world to break a generational cycle of poverty through micro lending and microfinance. Another thing that they mentioned was child sponsorship. And a lot of you may be involved in child sponsorship, maybe you're not. A few years ago, Compassion International opened up their child sponsorship to some research, and there was a longitudinal study that was done, and the feedback came back remarkably that child sponsorship works really, really well to empower children who grow up in contexts of poverty to break that cycle of poverty. So they listed that in here as well. Lots of different organizations are doing that now. Many of them are doing it well. They also listed sign up for and distribute information. So writing things out, creating brochures, handing them out, starting up a blog, starting up a website. In my case, that's why I helped to edit the New Urban World Journal and publishing books through the Urban Shalom Society, is to help get these ideas about advocacy out. And then finally, they listed in the book to speak out and educate policymakers. Just this last week, I was in Washington, D.C. I think I mentioned that to a lot of you. I was in D.C. to go over there to advocate for the cause of youth mentoring in the United States. So I set up meetings with our House representatives from Pennsylvania and also with my 2 state senators. And I was talking to them about the power of how our church's mentoring relationships with young people here in Pittsburgh has been transformational in the lives of the kids that we've been impacting, and how they're graduating from high school and graduating from college. And we're seeing a lot of great signs of hope through our mentoring, but it requires funding to be able to do that program really well. And I wanted to make sure that our representatives understood the power of youth mentoring. So it was a little bit awkward to kind of get in front of the representatives and to speak well about it, but I just shared some stories and it ended up going really well. So I wanted to pause right here because you don't want to hear me talk for the next hour and a half. I want to hear from you a little bit. I know most of you read through Half the Sky, and sometimes it can be challenging when I just throw like a page at you. So just think in general, what are some examples of advocacy that you're currently involved in that maybe you could share with the rest of the group so that we can learn from each other? And I'll stop sharing my screens and then get back to the presentation in just a moment, but so I can see everybody. Who wants to go first? Share about some advocacy that you're involved in.
All right.
Okay, go ahead, Summer.
At present, I work with an organization called the San Diego Organizing Project, which is a group that sort of organizes faith and religious leaders across various traditions to work on issues that are sort of salient or adversely affect people of color in particular, but also people who, homeless population, people, of various socioeconomic statuses in San Diego. And it actually is an arm of PICO. I don't know if you're familiar with PICO. Okay. And so right now, one of our, of course, being here in San Diego, one of our biggest challenges is, and I think I mentioned it on one of my blog posts vaguely, is the immigrant, Latino, well, Chicano, Mexican immigrant, undocumented immigrants in the United States. And as a result of just the recent sort of tone of the administration, there have been a whole lot of people, I guess, gung-ho to sort of ensure that undocumented immigrants are returned, if you will, to Mexico. That said, there are a couple of government agencies. So we have an agency here called ICE, Immigration Customs, the E is escaping me, but they are responsible for, if there are undocumented immigrants who have committed crimes, they are kind of the arm of the government that sort of in the jails, etc. What's happening now is that ICE and some, for the most part, vigilante folks in the city and the San Diego Police Department are kind of working together to create these sort of initiatives to, I guess, find undocumented workers and return them to Mexico. But the ways in which they're doing it is like knocking on their doors at like midnight when they're sleeping, and things of that nature, right? Which are very, very inappropriate, and they're not necessarily the ways in which things should be working. That said, we're working on an initiative firstly to inform and to ensure that churches are aware that this is happening, that people are being pulled from their beds in their homes in the middle of the night. People are being pulled as they're dropping their children off at school, those types of things, right? So firstly, just ensuring that churches are aware that this is happening, and also having conversations with people in the community, in that particular community, just ways to be aware of, okay, if this happens, this is what you do. Much like if you're stopped by the police in the African-American community, right? These are some things that you can do. So right now, we are working toward being advocates for that particular population. A lot of them, don't speak English, but they have children here who do, right? So it's a very interesting and disheartening thing. But yeah, it's to be honest, it's really crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And so I would say, like, right now, that's a project that I'm kind of involved in to try to figure out, like, how can we, we get it, right? So if they're undocumented, there are certain things, steps that we have to take, but we don't have to take measures that are really kind of illegal, to make that happen. So.
Definitely. That's a great example with your organization. So you've had some training in community organizing?
Yes.
I'm assuming. Okay. So
Yeah.
that involves, just for our group, I'm pretty familiar with community organizing, but can you just share maybe a little bit some of the steps that you might take with this specific issue?
Yes. So organizing really is what SCOP does is it works with churches, it works with community organizations to sort of help them understand the necessary steps to ultimately affect policy, right? To make policy change. And so in this regard, in this particular project, what we have done, or what the organizers of this particular arm of the project have laid out or created like steps and measures. First of all, created partnerships with organizations in the community, but laid out steps in terms of, okay, if this happens, if this happens, that. And then, like, literally, we are in these communities sort of passing out this information, or just making sure people are aware, like, so walking streets, walking neighborhoods, walking blocks, to distribute this information, because really, that's the only way you can get it out there. People are not necessarily coming to your churches. They're not necessarily coming to your events. And of course, we do have public forums, but it's really people being trained on these things that are going on, and effectively communicating it to the people in the community, and giving steps like, if this happens to your mother, this is what you do. These are numbers you can call. These are people that you can, and it really is a foot movement, right? Just door to door community, handing out, information. So yeah.
And my last question, that's really great. That's what I was hoping you were going to share about some of the practical steps. How do you feel? What are your emotions when you're doing organizing like that? When you're going door to door, is it like, oh, this is the most normal thing in the world, or is it you have to overcome?
Yeah. So of course, there are always challenges with going door to door, just no matter what you're doing, right? I mean, if I'm honest with myself, I don't like anybody knocking on my door that I'm not expecting, right? So there's always that. There's that, like, okay, who are you? And then in particular with this community, who is already sort of on edge, given what's going on, with sort of undocumented immigrants, etc. It can be more challenging, because now I'm on alert all the time, thinking, oh my gosh, is this somebody gonna knock on my door to deport me or to put me in jail? And so, there's always a challenge with, we are here, to help. And then, just thinking about too, what we've been talking about with When Helping Hurts, right? There's always this constant, like, checking. Even, we feel like we've laid out best practices. We feel like we've given, advice and created resources, but there's still always this thing in the back of our heads, right? That we're like, okay, but we still don't want to go in like, this is what you need to do to survive, or to, and so there's this fine line of being respectful of culture, of different cultures, of different language, and sort of, it's uncomfortable. I mean, to be honest, it's uncomfortable, particularly when, it's a culture that is different from our own. I mean, I will be honest, the majority of the people who work with the San Diego Organizing Project are either African American or Caucasian American, right? So, so there's that, right? We're walking into full-on Latino Chicano communities, like, hey, so it can be unnerving on both ends, right?
Yeah.
So.
That's great. And why don't we stay on that track with everybody? This is a good discussion. So does anyone else in the group have any experience with community organizing and maybe could share some similar, what types of community organizing have you done, and maybe drill a little bit deeper and describe what you're kind of thinking, or what kind of cross-cultural skills are needed when you do that. Anyone else? Does anyone else have any organizing experience? All right. Well,
maybe, yeah. I think I'm getting a lot of challenges from the learning, especially about grassroots initiative and these advocacy issues. I can say that it is work I was doing, but I'm really getting a very deeper understanding and kind of being challenged by what I'm learning from all these readings and the discussions. South Sudan is coming to an end in March, and we are organizing indoor project evaluation. In that process, I tried a project evaluation. We do engage communities, but I really have taken time with the people who are doing the assessment to think about it deeply and get the voice of the community, whom we said we have served them for the past 3 years. The opinion, not what the donors are happy to hear, but what do they really feel about the project, and what experiences they have enjoyed, or which experience was not good for them, and what are the things that they would love to be done differently. That is the area I really try to apply my new learning. The other area is the area of the current situation in Ethiopia and the role of church, as I have tried to share in some occasions during our discussion. The political situation in Ethiopia is not very conducive, and the system, the regime is oppressive. There is no freedom of speech. There is no freedom of writing. People are arrested without any legal procedures, and those kind of things, even get killed for just demanding for the right. The church has been quiet and silent even up to now, and I'm sometimes wondering, is it really, are we supposed to be silent, or we have to make our voice heard? The risk is there, and just recently, about 2 or 3 days ago, I got a post by one of the famous evangelists. He's living in US now. He wrote about the political situation. He said it is the responsibility of church to speak for the voiceless, and also to advocate for people who are being affected through various government intervention of power, I mean. He was saying that it is church's responsibility, and he also mentioned that it is the government is for people, not people for government. And he posted something like that in Amharic, and I read it, and from advocacy point of view, I found it something you 100% endorse. So I put a few half paragraph, my comment on it, and I shared on the Facebook. And as usual, I was surprised. I only got very few likes, almost all of them are from people who are living abroad. And others are from South Sudanese colleagues who even don't read what is the evangelist was saying, apart from my general comment. So it didn't really surprise me because I knew if I post something else, I know most of my Christian friends, they like it, they share it, they comment it, but because of the fear, it is not the government will arrest me tomorrow because I shared that, but they knew that the government arrested the high level players. So all the low level players are even scared to the point that they can't click like to something they really believe in. I don't think that the government arrests anyone for liking any post, but because of what has happened to those people who have been in the front line in terms of advocacy, maybe they have dealt with 0.001% of the population, but they have managed to keep maybe 99% of the others to keep quiet, to zip their mouths, say nothing about what is going on. Not only in that, I think this is a fear, and we may say that people might have a point, but 700,000 people have been displaced by some government-led, underground government-led initiative, initiating a conflict between two groups, supporting one and also attacking the other in a way that it is not visible to everyone. Those 700,000 people have been displaced. They are living in a kind of temporary shelters. Is only one church among all the Ethiopian church that has responded to these people who have been affected. I don't think that it may get a political kind of interpretation if the church tries to support those kind of things. So it's like we are distancing ourselves from everything, and I can't say that I did this or that, but I'm just trying to make sense of the challenges I'm receiving from the readings and the discussion. What I see is too much to be done in terms of what I'm doing in World Vision, in terms of a real engagement of grassroots communities, doing with people instead of doing for or doing to people, and engagement of church to the community development, to community transformation. I'm just trying to think loudly and figure out what I can do, the small contribution I can make to, especially when it comes to the church and even the development communities here in South Sudan. So it has really not come out clearly, but I'm just trying to organize all the information which are coming to me. And as I said, I have been really greatly challenged and getting a deeper understanding about all these issues. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to say about what you just said. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight. First of all, that we're all on this process of learning together, and it's a never-ending. I know you know this, but it's a never-ending process of improving and learning new things and trying different things. So glad to hear that you're being so open about your process of being challenged by some of the things we're working through in the course. Some of the things that stood out to me is that for many of us, if we get involved with advocacy, we're going to suffer. we're going to experience, we're not just going to feel uncomfortable, we're going to suffer, and we're going to get backlash. When you think about the example I used earlier of William Wilberforce with abolition in the British Empire, people thought that was impossible, and he was relentlessly ridiculed for years. It took 20 or 30 years of relentless advocacy on his part, and he really struggled a lot. And Martin Luther King here in the U.S., another example of someone who suffered tremendous strain and pushback from so many different fronts, and his family was personally attacked. I mean, it's just really hard to believe, and ending up with him being killed. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart. And in your particular context, that's a great example of how, if you do decide to step out and advocate, a person could be arrested or persecuted in some way. So that's a really good example of how we have to really be empowered by the Spirit to know when to engage and how to engage. And if you try to do it out of your own flesh and blood, you're probably not going to be lasting very long in that work. But it is important still to speak out. You also highlighted social media, which is a really interesting thing. We have a globally connected world now through social media, places like Facebook. Very interesting that you cited that as an example of one way of kind of speaking up, and sitting there like, okay, should I forward this on Facebook or not? And what are the consequences going to be if that comes at me? And there's a lot of bold people behind keyboards around the world, and plenty of people who are ready to kind of push back on you. So that can be another good way to get to engage, though. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight from what you said, which was really important, you talked about 700,000 people in your context being displaced and living in informal settlements. And that's, again, one of the reasons why BGU is so passionate about engaging cities and engaging leaders in the majority world. It's because 1 in 6 people on this planet are living in informal settlements. And one area to engage could be around something as simple as housing, trying to engage to make sure that every human being born should have access to adequate housing with water, food, the basics. And so that's a significant issue that a lot of transformational leaders are facing. So thank you for highlighting how you're processing through this.
Thank you.
Let's keep, if anyone has any comments for Summer or Hailu, you can ask questions or comment on what they shared. Or if you would like to talk a little bit about how you're involved with advocacy. It doesn't have to be community organizing necessarily, but how are you involved in advocacy?
If I could add, Dr. Brian, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm not at home, so this is a different location, and apparently the internet is a little unstable here. But my big thing has to do with literacy and education in particular. What I've discovered is that there's a direct correlation between persons in those areas that are socially, economically depressed and them actually being able to fulfill potential. And so what I have done is particularly to focus on those communities in terms of getting our children to read, because many they're jobless. Ensure that those children are.
Marcel, we're losing you a little bit here. I heard the first part of what you said, but then you started to break up a little bit. So you want to try again? Keep going. So we heard all the way up to you're helping with literacy, you're helping children with reading. Joblessness is a big issue there, so you're kind of leaning in there a little bit. But anything to add to that?
Right. So what I've done, because I recognize the importance of working with our parents, and so I have actually called me rich parents also to understand that the parents
sorry, we're kind of losing you, Marcel. So why don't you So thank you for sharing that. And just a reminder, if your internet connection is not well, Marcel, you can use the chat room as well and maybe leave a comment for there, and then I'll read it to the group. So sorry that you were getting cut off there. Any other comments on advocacy that anybody else wants to share?
I'll share.
Okay.
Sorry I was late. I have a little childcare situation over here, so I'm also kind of in and out. But I think we do. One thing that comes to mind with advocacy is community partnerships. So just same idea as community organizing, but like from an organizational level, partnering with other organizations together to have a stronger impact. And one thing that's been really cool for us in San Diego is this thing called the Resident Leadership Academy. And the city has curriculum that anyone can take through and put into their organization, and then take a group through. And the residents they learn how to impact their community through it's a secular curriculum, but through different ways, through transportation, through food access, through these different, there's just different, chapters of the curriculum. And then at the end, they do a community improvement project together where they lead the whole project and they implement it. And so we did it with youth because we focus on youth with urban life. And it was also part of one of our urban farming programs. But it was a great connection to partner together with people working in the city. They would also bring in different speakers to help connect students to change makers and the pathway of actually having an impact in the city. And then the end, they did a project themselves that had to do with the farm stand and things like that for food access in our neighborhood. So I think I really appreciated the kind of collective impact thought that's happening, which is more and more organizations and churches partnering together, or any faith groups or anything partnering together to be able to make impact, versus like thinking that it's all on us or all on our one group. I mean, I think churches also are very, culprits of that mentality too, like just what's going on in my church, my organization, versus like really looking at the wider amount of assets in the community and partnering together for like a wider impact. I think that's been, for us, it's been really important. And I just think it's so much more helpful to kind of think about pulling all of our resources together instead of trying to figure it out, these huge problems, systemic problems, on our own. So it also, I think, really creates great bridges between the faith-based community and your more secular community, or communities of people working in government or people working in the nonprofit sector. And so I really appreciated that. And then one other thing I'll say is I feel like I've really been exploring in the past, probably 10 years, what my role is in advocating within the white community, and how I can go to mainly white churches or, denominations or sometimes my parents' friends on Facebook or whatever it is, and be a voice that speaks truth into that community in a way that doesn't put pressure on communities of color to have to speak to the white community about injustices that they're perpetuating. And so I've tried to really think about what is my role in leveraging my own ethnicity and having a voice in those spaces that's an advocate for change that needs to happen.
That's great. What stood out to me from your comments there is the collective impact with other churches. We can't do this work alone, and if you try to go on a solo mission, you're going to get taken out pretty quickly. So that's a great example. I know here in Pittsburgh, and specifically in the Homewood neighborhood where I'm located, this is definitely a challenge. A lot of the churches and nonprofit organizations don't work well together, have a history of infighting, and then there's tension between those organizations and the politicians, and there's infighting that happens there. So one thing you can do is throw your hands up and just say, you know what, forget it, this is never going to work. Or you can engage and really try to be a bridge builder and a person who helps to heal some of the wounds that are maybe some of the barriers that are keeping organizations and churches from collaborating, which is a big thing at BGU. I know that the best example I saw of that was the No Name Fellowship in Fresno, California. I don't know. I think Marcel may have taken off. I think he dropped off the Zoom here, but he was just in Fresno for a course and probably got a chance to see the No Name Fellowship, which is just politicians, police, community organizations, churches, business leaders, faith leaders, any stakeholders in their city just showing up, and they call it the No Name Fellowship on purpose, just to be able to not have an agenda, just to be able to show up and work towards some of the common issues that are the big picture issues that are facing their culture. So that's great, Sarah. Some awesome examples there. And then also I wanted to highlight what you said about advocating within the white community. I know in the US, a lot of people of color feel that burden of trying to always have to put words to things and lead efforts towards reconciliation. And it's really a difficult and challenging burden to kind of help white people get it here in the US. So it's definitely important work there as well for you. So good examples. Let's hear from Natong or Margot. I know you're on. You can't. Your videos. You don't have a video capacity, but you can share if you want to. So Natong or Margot.
Yeah, I'll go first. I have been talking with the leaders of our organization about the ongoing war just near my hometown. 1 week ago, the fighting started again. Even as I'm speaking now, the airplanes are flying over my house.
Wow.
According to the newspaper, around 1,000 to 3,000 are trapped in the fighting zones, and most of them were not able to return to their homes. So both sides of the armies are blocking them, and from what we heard from some resources, most of them have their foods and waters are all drying up, and so they have a lot of difficulties. If they cannot return back home within, let's say 1 or 2 days, most of them will be starving to death. So I was talking with the leaders of my church that we should do something for them. And yesterday we were talking with some leaders from the political parties to allow the church to go and give them food or waters or some necessary things. And of course, I have to convince some of the leaders of the church, because most of them are afraid and they don't want to get involved in the fightings. So they said it can affect even our organizations. And so anyway, as a lesson from this church, from this class, I was telling them, unless we don't show the love of God right now, our image and even our credibility will be gone. So in a sense, I'm doing advocacy for those being trapped in the war zone. So even I'm asking for your prayer as well. Thank you.
Yeah, goodness. I have some questions. I have some questions for you, but let's pray for you right now as a group. God, we lift up Natong and his country and his context, and God, there are some things that are transcending these educational classes that we take, and that is real people who are suffering in a real place in real time. So God, all of us I know together pray for him, that you would give him the power of your Spirit to be bold and courageous, but also know when to back up and when to move and when to pull back. And God, we pray mostly for anyone who's suffering in the name of Jesus, that you would work through these churches to accomplish your purposes there, and help people to discern and to know when to engage and how to engage. And we just put the entire situation in your hands. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Yeah, so how are you If I could drill a little bit deeper with you personally, I did that with Summer a little bit earlier, but what kind of emotions are you processing through as you're working through these other churches and leaders to try to get people to overcome fear in order to be able to engage with what's going on? What are some of the processes that you're, going through in your heart and your mind that are, impacting you?
Yeah, well, I think if the church stand up and speak with the government, there won't be not much of a problem. And the reason the governments are doing these offenses is because most of the church members, we are very much silent about the current ongoing situation. So I was talking with my leaders uh, as a denomination. See, let's see, we have church membership of around 50,000 church members. So if we represent this much of people, and when we work together with another denomination, like says, in my state, there are more than millions of Christians living in my state. So if we work together, the government will listen. This is my conviction. We have been talking about the IDP camps and the wars and the difficulties people are suffering, but we never work together with the NGO organizations and others people. For example, even in my church, there are some laymen who have influential governmental position in the government offices. So we can join with them and others NGO organizations. And so by the grace of God, my leaders, yeah, they agree to go to the war zones. So next week they will be they will going around 3 to 5 members they they will go to the war zone representing our church and our KBBC organizations.
Wow.
And with the some help we can get, and we are planning to talk with the uh, army leaders to allow the civilians to return back home, because even a lot of our church members are stuck there, so they cannot come and they cannot cross the road. So we plan to talk with the military leaders there.
Yeah, so that's a pastoral challenge if your church members are stuck in a war zone, for sure. Well, definitely. Thank you for sharing about that, and we'll continue to be praying for your circumstances and for God to lead you with that. Margot, can you share for a little bit about maybe some examples of advocacy that you're engaged in? Is your mic working?
Hear me? Can you hear me?
We can barely hear you. Can you speak up a little louder?
Hello.
There you go. Okay.
That's better?
Yep.
Okay, I had to use the desktop in the office today, so I hope it's the quality is okay. Well, I'm not sure how much most of you know about the Bahamas. I mentioned in my first introduction that we became independent in 1973, so the nation is quite young, way of a lot further behind than most of the countries we're talking about here. And Natong, I will definitely keep you in prayer in what's going on in your nation and your people. But so the Bahamas has been independent for about 45 years. This year makes 45 years. And for the first 30 years of our independence, everything was going really beautifully. People were doing well economically. There was increasing equity for everyone. And then all of a sudden, um, it was as if something began to happen globally. The governments began to bring in referendums to see how they can change local and cultural habits, which became confusing because as a nation, the people voted no to both referendums. The first one was to legalize gambling. There was a landslide referendum by the church which was pretty much the whole nation voted no against it. And then there was a second referendum that talked about um, making marriage between men and women acceptable. Sorry, same-sex marriage is acceptable. And again, the church was strong in influencing the referendum, and so there was a landslide uh, referendum of saying no. But apparently, the governments in the Bahamas are not listening to the people, and that's not one government, but it seems to be succeeding governments. And so it seems as if there is a higher power, a global issue, like what um, Paula was saying in her messages, that there is a global change the whole makeup of the Bahamian people. And so my work has really been uh, to work with people in our community to maintain some of our values, because we see that uh, when our values are trampled upon, we see social injustice begin to escalate. We see more unemployment taking place, and governments turning a blind eye to the increasing unemployment, increasing levels of poverty. Governments seem to be powerless, and not just one government, but again, succeeding governments. And so these are the things that concern me. I've been trying to establish a transitional home and a transformational center that will help people who have been out of employment for some years um, find a place where they can stay and begin to reorganize their lives, begin to find who they are in terms of looking at their gifts and calling, and begin to do work to be more self sustaining instead of trying to look for a job, because jobs seem to not be um, coming our way anymore. It's as if there's no more employment. The banks are changing their policies. They're no longer providing interest rates on savings accounts. The whole business sector seems to be changing right before our eyes, creating instability, creating poverty, creating a culture that did not exist 20, 30 years ago. And so the church is found in the middle, uncertain of what to do. They are, like most churches, they're just stuck in the four walls, and they're only preaching the gospel. And so we are working at creating social enterprises that will create employment, but employment that helps people use their gifts and talents to create their own work.
Yeah, that's great. So good examples that you listed specifically. One of the things I wanted to unpack a little bit was you talked about how you had these referendums, and then you said with the government, it seemed like there was a higher power that was at play that was kind of manipulating things or at work. And that's a really key concept for us to understand when we do the work of advocacy or of poverty alleviation. Is it's one thing, it's much more manageable to focus on individual behaviors and individual people and how individuals might experience transformation. It's also important, though, for us to be able to understand at the systemic level that's just like a person can demonstrate evil or they can live a good life. And for us who are followers of Jesus, hopefully we can continue to live a good life because of what God has done for us and the power of His Spirit, even though we still sin. In the systems, there can also be evil as well at the systemic level. And some of the things that Summer was talking about earlier in her initial comments about mass incarceration issues in the United States, also the comprehensive immigration system, the reform that's needed there. There are so many things at the systemic level. Walter Wink is a theologian who calls those the power the powers that be. He has a whole series that's pretty interesting on the powers and how they impact all of our lives. And so, a system could be a government, or it could be economic, or it could be religious. We've talked about some of the systems in this course, but that a system can also be redeemed. And as transformational leaders, we can step in and engage at the systemic level to help see redemption take place there, to lead to a process of transformation in those systems. It's much more challenging work. It's much more costly, but advocacy is kind of located within that realm at the systemic change level. And for us as leaders, again, each context is different. Some of us might be risking our lives to engage at the systemic level. Some of us might be not have it be that dramatic, but it's either way, it's still challenging to kind of engage with. So, I appreciate you kind of highlighting that, Margot, as an experience of how the systems are at play there. And sometimes individuals can get lost in the shuffle with that. So this is all really great, everybody. I want to continue, since we're about an hour into the call. I'm going to move forward a little bit. So if you have any questions or comments, make sure you're kind of writing those in your notes, and we'll circle back around with you. I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I'm going to move pretty quickly through the rest of these slides so that we can have lots of time to discuss as we kind of move forward. So sorry, one second here. For some reason. All right. Try this again. Okay. So we talked about that from Half the Sky. When helping hurts, this concept that we talked about, development, they have relief, rehabilitation, development. On page 100 of that book, development is a process of ongoing change that moves all the people involved, both the helpers and the helped, closer to being in right relationship with God, self, others, and the rest of creation. And one of the keys there is development is not done to people or for people, but with people. That's the key concept. So one of the things I want to interject into this advocacy conversation is it can seem like we want to go and advocate on our own and leave the people that we're advocating for behind. And one of the best things that we need to do is to make sure that the people are with us, that we're advocating for, that it's their ideas and their passion and their heart that's behind the advocacy work that we're doing. In Geography of Grace, which is kind of the text that we're focusing on this week. And again, there's some great stuff in this book. A lot of you may not agree with a lot of the things that are in Geography of Grace, but they really drive home this concept of doing relationships with people. When we do something to somebody, so this is on page 75 of Geography of Grace, and if you have the online Kindle version, if you have the Kindle version, it's chapter 4 on radical presence, which is what the authors are talking about there. And in that chapter on radical presence, chapter 4, the authors introduced this concept, this incarnational approach, and they talk about how prepositions matter, so prepositions of to, for, and with. Then the relational stance that they describe, when you do something to somebody, you have a paternalistic stance, and it almost always leads to oppression. It almost always leads to one person or one group of people trying to get over on another group of people. And oftentimes it happens unintentionally, but that tends to be the outcome whenever you do something to somebody. If you try to do something for somebody, that relational stance is maternalistic, these authors called it. And it often leads to this really complex web of codependence that comes out of that. Codependent relationships where there's kind of this mutual dependence on each other to meet each other's needs. And then, of course, there's the hope that they think the stance they hope you'll take is with, which is a more incarnational approach, which almost always leads to a process of transformation for both the person serving and the person being served. That's the relational stance that they're hoping for. And it's interesting. I wanted to give an example of how, the question I was going to ask is, where have you seen paternalism or maternalism or incarnational approaches in your context? So think about that. And when we get to our discussion here at the end, if you have some examples of how you've seen paternalistic approaches impacting your area or any of those approaches. For me, when we first moved into the neighborhood here, for 3 years, I was commuting into the neighborhood of Homewood here in Pittsburgh, and I was living about 30 minutes away. And when I decided to kind of fully embrace the incarnational approach, move my family into the neighborhood where we do a lot of our ministry, one of the things that we started up was an initiative that was just a community meal in our living room to get to know our neighbors and to get to know the kids and their families in our neighborhood. So that's where Monday Night Madness was started. We had a group of 4 or 5 kids that I had reached through our mentoring program that started coming on Mondays for dinner. And that turned into 6 or 7 kids. It turned into 15 or 20 kids. Within a year, we had around 40 or 50 kids and their families showing up every Monday night for a big block party on our block. And it was really interesting that was the best way that I could get to know the neighborhood, was just to be able to sit with people. There wasn't really a whole lot of structure to it. We eventually outgrew our home, and we had to move it over to the local YMCA, and it kind of continued to grow from there. And to this day, there are groups of people that meet that kind of sprang out of that Monday Night Madness group that we joked around and called it. We had some amazing times, but I'm sharing that because for me, that's where I first started to hear the most about the approaches, the issues that we're facing the neighborhood, and the different things that we needed to mobilize for and become activists for as a collective group and with our neighbors. It really sprang out of those meals that we were sharing together. And I would not have been able to know kind of where to be to do advocacy. I would have probably done, and I still sometimes slip into paternalistic and maternalistic modes of advocacy, and I have to always watch myself. But the best approach is to have my neighbors with me, and me being in a service role to my neighbors as we take on some of the challenges that are facing our neighborhood, including violence and including crime and systems breaking down all around us in our neighborhood. A lot of those conversations of advocacy spring out of those incarnational relationships that we have. So with that concept of sharing a table, I wanted to just read one of my favorite quotes. Is from Bartolome de las Casas. So he was a priest who lived in Latin America whenever there was the conquistadors were forcing people to convert to Christianity, enslaving them, forcing them to work in the mines. From when the conquistadors first arrived, there were nearly 100 million indigenous people in that area that were already living native to that area. 100 years later, that population went from 100 million down to 5 million people because of disease and forced enslavement and forced conversion. And Bartolome de las Casas was a Christian who saw these wrongs that were happening, and he used to go and meet with the royal leaders in the royal court. He would debate a guy named Sepulveda in front of the royal court. Sepulveda was arguing that human beings need to be enslaved, that there's some people that that's just the natural order of things. And Las Casas would go and debate him and say, no, it's actually evil what we're doing, and here's why. This is one of his famous things that he shared in front of the royal court. He said, "Can you consider Christian those whose bread has not fed one single hungry person, whose drink has not satiated anyone's thirst, or whose table is not known by any poor person? Christian are the ones who are merciful to all, who are moved by those who are injured, who do not allow the poor to be oppressed in their presence, those who help the needy, those who frequently aid the indigent, those who suffer with those who suffer, who feel the other's pain as their own. Anyone, therefore, who wants to be a friend of the world becomes the enemy of God." He was pulling that from James 4:4. So you can see when you get involved in this work of advocacy, and he was falling in love with these people that he was pastoring that were suffering. And this is the kind of thing that came out of his advocacy that caused him to spend his life and dedicate his life to overthrowing this oppressive system that were impacting people that he loved where he was serving. And sometimes as advocacy people, we have to put words to our experiences. We have to go in front of powerful people and try to share what we're most passionate about. But that often comes with us spending time with people around a meal. A meal is a great place to get to know people and build community. Let me keep going here. On page 41 of When Helping Hurts, let me just check real quick and reference which chapter it is. I think Margot or you may have the Kindle version. It's in the chapter 1, Why Did Jesus Come to Earth chapter. So this was page 41 of When Helping Hurts. But I really like this as a great description of advocacy. We are to embody Jesus Christ by doing what he did and what he continues to do through us. Declare using both words and deeds that Jesus is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who is bringing a kingdom of righteousness, justice, and peace. And the authors went on to write, and the church needs to do this where Jesus did it, among the blind, the lame, the sick, and outcast, and the poor. So that requires that radical incarnational presence with the people that we're actually trying to do advocacy work with. Some biblical examples. Just wanted to highlight some of these. I know all of you are aware, but some of my favorite biblical examples are Esther in the Old Testament, utilizing her position in the with the king to advocate for saving the lives of the people that she was advocating for. Nehemiah is a great example of advocacy, how he utilized his position of influence to engage. It's one of the best case studies that we have in the Bible of advocacy work. And actually, there's a book that Robert Linthicum wrote called Transforming Power that is a really amazing case study and deep dive on Nehemiah's advocacy. Of course, Jesus, the greatest advocate we have, he's our ultimate advocate with the Father on behalf of us, but also with what he modeled in his ministry. He really used a lot of words and works to demonstrate how we can advocate for each other. And he also used story. Jesus is famous for the parables, but utilizing story. A lot of us, as I was listening to you talking about advocacy, I was hearing that you're getting a little bit frustrated maybe with trying to mobilize other Christians and churches to get involved with these important causes. And just to remind you that Jesus is a great example of someone who kind of thought outside the box to use story and parables to help people kind of get it, to latch on to why we need to engage with these important challenges that we're facing. And then Philemon is my favorite New Testament story besides the Gospels where Jesus' story is told. But Philemon's an awesome story of Paul advocating for Onesimus, who was a runaway slave who ran away to Rome to hide out in the big city. Some of you may have heard Ray Bakke kind of famously lecture on Philemon's and Onesimus' story. It's one of his most famous sermons, but it's a powerful story of reconciliation and Paul advocating for Onesimus to be returned as a brother in Christ to Philemon. Philemon should have killed Onesimus on the spot when he arrived with that letter that he was holding from Paul. And instead, we hear through history sources that there was a pastor who took over for the Apostle John. The largest church in the world was a bishop named Onesimus, and a lot of scholars think that was the same person. And also Onesimus preserved many of the letters in our New Testament for us that we have today. And so, advocacy can really be worth it. Well, even if you just advocate for one person like Paul did for Onesimus, you never know what God's going to do in the life of that person. So those are just a few biblical examples. Again, I'm moving through this kind of quick because I want to hear from you again before we wrap up our time. But this is another question that I have for you is, where is God calling you to advocacy? We talked about that already, and you've already given some great examples from housing, micro lending, education, healthcare, employment, business, local church. I could throw in there politics and lots of other ways that you could get engaged with advocacy. So maybe as you're reading through some of these readings from the course, or as you're having some of these discussions, or even listening and learning from each other, you're getting some ideas of some new things that you might be interested in doing. And that would be my question. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so we can talk a little bit. My question for all of you is, are there any new areas that you're considering getting involved in with advocacy after hearing some of the stories today, or maybe there was something in the online discussions that kind of sparked some passion or interest from you?
Okay, can I go first?
Yes, please.
Okay. Looking at your list, I definitely know that I'm called to begin advocacy in employment and business. And sometimes it's a bit of a conflict for me as a pastor because my heart and mind seem to always be on how do I create employment for people instead of thinking about developing a sermon. And so it's been a conflict in that area. I have business plans for creating these social enterprises. And when Sunday come, I'm like, oh my goodness, think about the sermon. But I'm so my heart and my passion is so much about creating employment that will help people out of poverty, and it's something I'm trying to work out.
Margaret, thank you for sharing that. That is a true challenge for pastors and a lot of Christian leaders, is just the time and the margin to be able to do some of these things that we really feel passionate about doing. But so much of it comes down to the day to day. I'm just trying to survive and get through my day. A lot that makes another layer of challenge for us to do. But at the same point, your ideas of social entrepreneurship and enterprise are crucial to a lot of what we're talking about. So thanks for sharing that. Who else wants to share maybe some new ideas? And you can also share about if you have some examples of how you've seen maybe other people or organizations that are doing paternalism or maternalism or really good incarnational advocacy work in your area. So either one of those questions.
If I could, Dr. Brian.
Yes.
One of the areas that I'm seriously considering and focusing on now is that of what we call SEN. That is people with special needs. In our country, in our context, people who might be visually impaired, they might have an hearing impairment, whatever that special need might be, those persons are just placed in a corner. Unlike the developed countries, where there are programs, there are activities for those persons to become integrally involved in society and make a contribution. And so that is one of the areas that I am seriously looking at. How we, not because someone is confined to a wheelchair, it means that the person will be reduced to nothing and therefore cannot make a contribution. And so we have people like that in our country. We have children like that in our country who have not been able to do anything. They've been sidelined because there isn't a strong program in moving those persons forward in terms of them making a contribution to society. So that is something that I'm seriously considering in terms of advocacy. The other thing I wanted to mention in terms of incarnational leadership is we have these what we call meetings. Many times we go to communities and we preach, but sometimes people just go to communities, they preach the gospel and they walk away. We have a situation in our context where some people would have never gone to some communities because of the kind of criminal activities, the drugs and so on. So I have personally decided, look, come what may, as an evangelist, to go into those communities. And so a strange thing happened in a particular community that I had gone into. It's called the place is Leopold Street. It is known for gays. It is known for drugs, the shootings and so on. And so I would have gone into that community, and after preaching the gospel, we would have listened to people and so on. And it's amazing. One lady asked me, "What do you do?" And she said to me that my child doesn't go to school, and I understand that you are into education. Can you help me? That young man is back in school now because of the kind of interaction that we had. And then she further said that she needed money. So what we did is we had the church prepared a basket for her, and
Oh, Marcel, you were on a roll there, and then you froze up for a second.
Thank you, and we're doing a good job, and so we gained the support of so many people because of this whole concept of incarnational leadership, not just preaching the word, but a holistic gospel.
Yes. Great examples. That's great. When you're it's a great example, not just because it's a good story, but that's a good example of transformational leadership, how you become a bridge to the powerful and the powerless, and you give yourself away to others, and it requires different creativity and different responses in each situation. So that's a really great example. Who else wants to share?
I can share.
Go for it.
Most recently, I decided to kind of check out the League of Women Voters. And here in California, the League of, for my colleagues in different countries, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan space that sort of convenes women together in an effort to really just encourage people to participate in the democracy, right? The political process that should be a democracy. So giving people confidence to be able to participate, sort of, presenting issues, on both sides, and just making sure that people are aware. And so most recently I attended a luncheon with them last week because the presenters that were coming were from a group called the California Innocence Project, which is an advocacy group that looks at people who have been wrongly convicted and who are in prison and go through this process of evidence, etc., and have successfully people released from prison, even though in some cases it's been 20 years that they've sat in prison for crimes they didn't commit. At any rate, that was my reason for attending this luncheon. And myself and one of my friends from undergrad, who is actually the vice chair of the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls for the state of California, we were the only 2 African-American women present. So the group I'm learning is here in San Diego, at least, is fairly homogenous. It's a homogenous group of Caucasian American women. For the most part, they are a bit older or more mature, I should say. And when we're talking about advocacy, and as we were talking about, you were talking about the maternalistic, paternalistic. I thought about all those situations where, much like kind of as well, right? Not to do these great things, but a lot of we don't necessarily readily practice the with. We want to do these great things for the Black community or for the Latino Chicano community, but there are no people from the Black community or the Latino Chicano community involved in your group. So what we're doing is we're saying, this seems like an issue to me. Like, I can look at a situation and say, oh my gosh, this is the biggest issue. I know it's got to be terrible. We should tackle this. And maybe not having a conversation with the community, and they'll say, yeah, that's a problem, but really our biggest problem now is X, Y, and Z. And so just being in that space and that moment kind of really, and of course reading When Helping Hurts and all of that, and the books that we've been reading, really kind of cemented for me, like, wow, this happens quite a bit, right? It happens. And again, it's not that we are ill-intentioned, but it is that, sometimes we take this approach, like you said, the maternalistic, like, let me help you. And I'm saying maternalistic because I'm a woman, and I'm thinking like how many times I've done that in my life, not just with advocacy, but, just in general, like, oh my gosh, let me help you. I can do it. Right. And so I thought about that, like, wow, like and there were so many people coming over to our table, like, strange, but like, like, hey, we hear one of you's a commissioner, and, so it was the most interesting scenario, like, that I've been in for quite some time. But when you were talking, I thought about that, like, wow, and now I'm encouraged to become a member of that organization to present an alternative. Like, I am, for some of those initiatives, I am in that group, right? I am them. So perhaps we can work together, perhaps we can, I'm from the community that you're speaking of. My church is there, right? So that's kind of what I thought about, like, wow, interesting.
I love that. That's a really great example. And a lot of it is not like, ill-meaning people. A lot of it is just like, oh, this is, we didn't even really think about that. And, So my biggest one with that is I have a lot of young leaders in Pittsburgh come to me and say, hey, I have this idea for this, whatever the social cause is, and they'll present an entire, plan to me on how they're going to, they want their pastor to sign off on their great idea. And I always say, did you actually go and talk to any of the people that you're planning to reach with your idea about what they might do in their neighborhood?
Right.
And, it's a good check for us to have at all levels to say, like, hey, is this really springing out of incarnational presence? And but anyways, that's a great example. And I also love how you ended your comment about how you're willing to be a part of the solution, which kind of ironically gets back to what I was saying earlier about people of color always having to kind of bear that.
Right.
So I'm sure that gets tiring, but appreciating your wanting to engage to help out as well. So, so great comments. Who else haven't we heard from on this? Any new ideas that have come up regarding advocacy or any examples of maternalism or paternalism that you wanted to share?
I think I can share from our experience here in South Sudan as NGO worker. I witnessed the maternalistic and the incarnational approach together, blended in my project. The project I'm working on is supposed to be a developmental project, helping people so that they can help themselves. And it has really showed a good result. And whenever I'm going to community, we see a good result. They report that they have started getting a good harvest, they have made a good income, and at the end, they always ask you, they need additional support. Sometimes we hear that they ask you something small, which we have to answer that, okay, from the yield you have received, you can sell some of it and buy this one and that one. So I think the NGO industry has caused a lot of harm in terms of making people dependent. That is what really we see on a daily basis in a country like South Sudan that has gone through a very long year humanitarian intervention. It's very hard to make this clear to the community that if you have got a relative peace and you are able to cultivate your land and you get a good harvest, you don't need NGOs. You can just continue by yourself with the new skill and experience you gain. It's not easy. It's only in few communities that you see the whiz. You see that they are got empowered, and they can even tell you that from now onward, we don't need you. So the same approach, the same project, when it's reached the community, I think it can bring two different kind of results based on who has implemented the project and with which approach they have worked with the community, or have they worked for the community. So I think it's just a daily experience. If you are working with NGOs, you see those kind of dependency syndrome is a big issue. That is what we are witnessing, and is a big challenge for us to move from there, especially in a relatively calm areas. We have to develop a capacity and empower them so that they take responsibility for the future.
That's great. I think one of the things I wanted to highlight about that developmental project, Halu, is you said, teaching self-dependence is not easy. It is really challenging. It's in, a part of the movement here in the U.S. is called the CCDA movement, or Christian Community Development. But one of the things that a lot of the leaders of that movement talk about is that it takes sometimes a minimum of 15 years of moving into the neighborhood, building relationships over time, getting through a generation with families or people that you're serving before you start to see some signs of progress and hope in terms of kind of moving away from a dependency mindset into people being fully empowered to be all God made them to be, which means that part of what we need to do is just show up. And it's really hard to keep going when you see all these other groups around you that are kind of showing up and just giving stuff away. And I'm sure it gets really disheartening. In fact, this just happened to me yesterday. There's a housing project in Homewood that I've been working with the families for the past 12 years. And just a couple months ago, a guy just showed up. He lives 2 hours away and he has good intentions. But he felt like God called him just to show up at the housing projects in Pittsburgh and just start giving away coats and toys and gloves and food. And someone had told him about me, so he reached out to me to set up a coffee just to get to know the neighborhood a little bit better. But it was really hard to sit across from him, and he just poured out how much God was telling him just to show up in this neighborhood and give a bunch of stuff away. And I had to be the one to kind of be in that gatekeeper role of like, actually, you're not really helping what we're trying to do here. There's actually a comprehensive plan that is in place in this neighborhood. A lot of groups that have been here for a long time are working together. We would love for you to be a part of that, of the plan that's working towards transformation in the neighborhood. But you showing up and not working with anybody else and just giving a bunch of stuff away is not helping. And it was hard. I don't know if he was kind of mad at me when we left the coffee, but it's you feel like you're constantly kind of fighting upstream when you're doing advocacy work and you're trying to really work towards empowerment. So, but thank you for that example. It kind of shows that we got to stay with it. Okay. So let's hear. How about Sarah? You want to share a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I think what I'm thinking about right now is we have a lot of young people in our community that are, I think I talked about this before, but they are dreamers and they're advocating for a solution to DACA, to the repeal of DACA. And so I think I'm just thinking right now, I'm speaking at our house church this week, and I'm kind of thinking about how do we engage some of the young people that have been out. One of our Urban Life alumni just got invited to the State of the Union as like Scott Peters, which is one of our congressmen, his guest. And so we just need to hear their stories more and hear what they're doing and be led by them. Dreamers that are actually really active in our community. So that's one thing that I'm thinking about. As Summer was talking about SDOP, I had friends that worked for SDOP a long time ago, and that made me think of getting involved with SDOP here, getting our faith community involved with SDOP, and thinking about how to participate with that group of people. And so Summer, hopefully we can connect over that. But yeah, and then I think on a broader level, the thing that I've been thinking about, which a little bit is the similar thing as what Hailey was sharing, which is I've been kind of discouraged in general in my like vocation about the cycle of dependency that nonprofits create in general, and the fundraising cycle that's constant. And I just think that we need to really, even a step beyond the CCD conversation about development versus betterment, I think, and the toxic charity and when helping hurts conversation, even going beyond that to really understanding what wealth generation looks like, what ownership looks like, how to I think we just really need to figure out with everyone at the table, again, not trying to come in and figure it out, but I think the nonprofit sector in particular, and churches for sure, need to take a hard look at like, I just don't think we can say like, oh, because we're not doing toxic charity, not giving away stuff, now we've figured it out, I just think it's not done yet, and I think that it's going to be a really, it's what Martin Luther King Jr., like they say, right, what he was killed for, was even talking about the greater systemic economic systems at play and how they continue to perpetuate systems of racism and white supremacy and all these things. So anyway, that's like maybe for another Zoom room or something, but I think that those wider issues have really, as I've been in the nonprofit sector for a long time now, I'm still frustrated or disillusioned by that process of dependency that even, you know, that still exists, even if you're doing workforce development programs or if you have social enterprises or whatever, which we do, you know, but like, it's got to be more than that, you know, because I don't want to just have our programs be training young people to just get like a minimum wage job that they can't live off of. Is still like, that's not moving the needle there, you know. So what is it? And so we are, you know, our community is really is trying to talk and enter into that conversation about what does it look like to enter into things that generate wealth, or, you know, create equity in a really long-term way. And obviously we're no experts, so we're also just trying to figure out who's thinking about this and who's talking about it and who's actually doing it. You know, if the nonprofit sector in America was serious about their job, everyone would be working to work themselves out of a job, to not need these organizations, you know, anymore. And that's not the same for churches, for sure, obviously, but that's definitely CCDA, what CCD talks about, you know, or passing over the mantle of leadership, but it's hard to see it actually happening. And so, you know, I think those are broader questions of advocacy that I think about.
Oh, wow. That was great. Economic justice is a great example of advocacy that's kind of like the big elephant in the room. I think I read an article recently that 1% of the world's population currently has around 50% of the wealth in the entire world, which is just, that's not getting any lower. The gaps between rich and poor, not just individuals, but countries as well, is getting worse and worse. So how does that play out in the US that has nearly 5% of the world's population, and half of those resources in the world are coming through the US? You know, is it enough for us to, at a church, to stand up and say, hey, bring this backpack for kids, you know, versus what does it look like? What does your lifestyle look like? You know, and how much is enough? And what does economic justice look like in the context of having this many resources to steward? Those are all great questions. I think the health and wealth gospel, the prosperity doctrine gospel, that has been kind of grew up in the US and is now being farmed out and really taking root in places like Africa and Latin America and other places around the world, kind of plays in the opposite direction, you know, encouraging people, if God loves you, he's going to make you a millionaire, or you know, so there's so many things we could unpack with that you're right, we would need a whole other Zoom room. So thank you for that. But on a simple level, I think it is a great challenge for nonprofit leaders. What does it look like to work yourself out of a job? You know, what does it look like for me? I've been operating in this neighborhood for 12 years. What would it look like for me if I didn't have this neighborhood? If I didn't have so much of my passion and self-identity wrapped up in trying to help people here, for the people that I've invested in for 12 years to pass me up and for me not to be needed anymore. And that's looking myself right in the mirror and saying, like, is that even possible? And so that's a challenging question. All right, Natong, go ahead.
Dr. Brian, in my book report, I mentioned about one NGO group called Shinim Bird. Actually, that is run by one of my faculty members and some of my former students. And they have been working with the IDP camps for now almost 6 years. So last month I was talking with them and about how they are operating their financial resources. Actually, they are very strong financially, and they have a lot of donors and lots of money. But after reading the One Helping Heart, I was giving them some advice about the way they should operate. So I was telling them, instead of giving out money and distributing food and pocket monies and some books, so I was telling them just to concentrate on one area, like education for the children, and like doing some microfinance to help the people there start some businesses. And frankly, I told my colleagues, the way you are doing is just for yourself, because You people are helping the IDPs for many years. That's good, but as a result of the way you are distributing monies and other clothes or other material things, these people, they are expecting almost every month for them to come and give them something. I was telling them, stop this and invest your money to help them start some business. Forsake the paternalism. So I was telling them, and as for the incarnational approach, we were discussing how we can send some teachers to go there at the China border and work with the kids there. So, by the grace of God, we have currently we have four of our graduates who are committed now to go to the IDP camps, and they have signed up for 2 years to work there with the kids. I think they are moving from paternalism to the incarnational approach.
Great example. Thanks, Natong. You really highlighted another issue of crucial importance with advocacy work, and that is a lot of people call it mission drift, but you actually described it really well in that initial nonprofit organization where we start off having one purpose that we serve and we have passion and focus in that area. Then funding and resources may emerge in another area and we go after that. So maybe we started off with education. Next thing you know, we're doing healthcare. Next thing you know, we're doing after school programs, and it's great to want to try to be holistic and reach people at different places, but that can really pull us away when we start chasing resources. And then when we become a big bureaucracy and our main goal then becomes to have everybody keep their jobs and get raises and keep the institution going, that can be troublesome as well. So really good example of what we're talking about. It's important to stay focused on the work at hand. Okay, so we're coming up in about an hour and 41 minutes here, and as I've mentioned to you before, I try to keep these under 2 hours. And if we have a smaller group like this, there's no need for me to drag it out. I think everybody got the opportunity to share a couple of times. But I will just throw out there, is there anyone else that has anything that did not get to share that you wanted to share? Now is your opportunity. Everybody's like, don't be that person that talks and we're about to end.
Well, I'll share a little. The Bahamas was a British colony. And so a lot of the companies, the organization, operate operate in the paternalistic pattern, which creates problems because people tend to get stuck on jobs because it represents security for them, and so they do not follow their passion to do something different because they're so used to the companies providing for them, and they're locked into systems when they really need to move on and do something, invest in the community, but they're stuck. The paternalism really creates dependency, I find. And like you, Dr. Brian, sometimes I fall into that trap also of trying to do it for people because I can do it faster. I know what I want. Uh, I I don't have enough time to wait for them to do it. So it's complicated, and but it's best to work with people. It is best to work with people because then they can develop and be proud of what we did together.
Yeah, that's a really great way of saying that, Margot, is that it's best to work with people. And as you were saying that, I could hear, all of us can probably point to times when we didn't do that and maybe we got things done faster, but we ruined some relationships along the way or caused some harm, versus on the other side of the spectrum, when we really truly do things with people and our relationships are right, we can find joy in the midst of what we're doing, which is for Christians, that's a really profound thing that God does for us, that we can find joy in the midst of our circumstances and in those right relationships. And in fact, that was one of my favorite parts about Geography of Grace, when they talk about doing ministry with people who are on the margins, the joy that comes out of that Jesus is able to help us have is one of the best parts of urban ministry and a best part of this type of work. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, this was a great discussion. I love this group. You're a smaller class, but you're mighty and power-packed. I really like it, and I appreciate how much you're contributing, both in these Zoom rooms and online discussions. So I'll post this recording if anybody wants to go back. But I'll also keep in mind that I'll be posting my slides from the lecture or from some of the things I was sharing in the info section, so you can look out for those if you're looking for the slides. And we're not going to have a Zoom room in week number 5. Our next Zoom together will be in week 6. So you're off next week from the Zoom, and then we'll be back together in week 6 for a Zoom. And I'll make sure I keep posting those and reminding you for those links. But you're all doing a great job with that. I did look at my notes, Summer, since you were talking about the groups earlier, and I think the person that dropped out from the group that had you and Sarah was a guy named Cody from Texas. He actually never ended up joining us. So there's 6 of us in this course. Sarah, I know you're like auditing and working through some different things with that, but I think it would be great for geographically and just with the location, if you and Summer can continue to link up in your group to just between now and week 6. Just to, if you have anything that you want to hash out together or collaborate on, that would be great. And then the other groups that were assigned for group 2, Marcel and Margot, I think it kind of makes sense geographically for you to be a part of that group too. If you have, again, if you need to lean on each other, if you're not understanding anything, or if you want to process through something, you can check in with each other. And then in week 6, you'll have a specific assignment for your group. And then Hailu and Natong, it's not exactly geographically close, but you're probably the closest of anyone in our group. So you'll be group 3, and there's some space there in the online classroom at the bottom of the lessons page for you to use that group 3 area if you want to process through anything. So again, don't stress too much about the group project, because the group project, I'll introduce some content in week 6 that you're going to be working on together, and then that'll feed into your individual projects that you have. So with that being said, are there any other questions or comments as we wrap up our time here? All right, let me close us then. And I'll look forward to seeing everybody in the online classroom. God, thank you for this group, for the passionate sharing that is happening. God, I pray that you would help us to learn from each other, even as this is heavy stuff that we're talking about, this advocacy work, and it's not for the faint of heart, and we need your strength and your passion to persevere and to move forward in some of these things. I pray that you continue to give us big dreams for your mission in this world and how we might participate, and to have the courage to step in and advocate and do the hard things that you ask us to do, just like you did. Help us to have the words to say and the actions to live out, and most importantly, to connect relationally with the people that we're trying to serve. And so we need your power to do that. We thank you for guiding this discussion today, and we pray that you would be with us moving forward, as you always are. And we ask this in your name. Amen. Thank you, everybody. Great job. Appreciate you.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.